Good day, everybody.
Hello, Folly.
Hi
Hello,
everyone.
everyone.
Hi Fabi.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Okay. Alrighty, I'm going to share my desktop here. There we go. Perfect. So we have quite a lot to cover. Thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to get started. We are missing one of the voting members of our TSC today, but hopefully by the time we get to anything important, Matt would have arrived. Okay. So today's agenda, to kick off with, this is our Linux antitrust policy. Please read and be aware of it. If you have any questions about this and you're a Linux employee, please contact the Linux legal team. If you're not a Linux employee, please contact your own legal department for any advice. For today, I'm going to take you briefly through just a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to be rolling out a TSC issue management process to formalize the collection, the raising, and the management of issues within the TSC. Just to give a little bit more structure as we start ramping up the TSC for community participation and involvement. I think it's important for us to just have a little bit better governance around how issues arrive at the TSC and then how we track and manage those issues after they pass through the TSC itself. Just a quick note on the TSC expansion. We're going to talk about that. And then we are also just going to give everybody here a heads up on Tazama 4.0.0's beta testing. That some of you will already have heard that as we have been speaking to people, but this is just to give you a little bit more information about what we are proposing. And then there are 3 issues that we'd like to discuss today at the TSC. These are listed here, and we have also logged them and I've published them today in our TSC channel on Slack. I am aware that these contain quite a lot of information, and I doubt that everybody here would have had an opportunity yet to review those in detail. So I think we are catching up a little bit here. So we may not get to conclude any of these issues today, but we might be able to give you at least an introduction so that if you wanted to review these ahead of a possible decision at our next TSC meeting, then you can do that as well. We'll see how it goes today. I do appreciate that these come through with a little bit less notice than we would like, and that is one of the things that we want to improve on going forward and introduce in our governance here as well. All right. This way. Okay. Issue management process. This is a very simple process, and I want to keep it as simple as possible, right? So when you have an idea or you have an issue or something that you want to address in Tazama, typically what we would do is we would log those issues in our GitHub. When we commission work, those issues are logged in the repository where the work is going to happen. So if you are doing work on the transaction monitoring service, for example, that issue will be logged in the transaction monitoring service issues list on GitHub. Well, what we want to do here is if you want something to be reviewed by the technical steering committee, then you should log that issue in our general issues repository on GitHub. We may reallocate that at a future point. I think, Ben, you and I had discussed actually calling something a specific transaction or a TSC repository, for example, for TSC issues. So be aware that this might change, but for now, we have a fairly sizable backlog of issues in that repository already. And what we will be doing over the next couple of weeks before our next TSC meeting is Sandy and I will go through these and clean them out a little bit. There's a lot of things in here that we wanted to do at some point and never did, or wanted to do and actually already completed. So we'll just need to clean up this list here a little bit. But any issue that you want to log that needs TSC approval or TSC insight or support, you would log in the general issues repository here. And then we will keep an eye on these, and then we will raise and prioritize these for a TSC agenda. If you have anything urgent, please reach out to me directly to say that this is something that we urgently need TSC support on, and then we can prioritize that on our agenda as well, and maybe triage our to-do list a little bit as we get busier. Right. So log the issue, and then that issue will be scheduled for a TSC such as this one, and we will review that issue here, and there will be 3 outcomes out of this. There may be a requirement for you to go away and do a little bit of additional work. We may need more information, not enough information to make a decision on, or the solution itself is somewhat incomplete still, so you need to go back and rework it. That'll be an update the issue, and that'll come out of here as a not yet. And then there may also be a outright rejection by the technical steering committee where you are proposing functionality or a feature that the technical steering committee feels does not meet with Tazama's mission or with the product direction or the roadmap or something like that. And then collectively, we may decide that that issue is not viable for the system at the moment. That doesn't mean that you can't do that issue on your own. It just means that it won't be a sanctioned TSC endeavor. And then that issue might end up being closed directly on the Tazama repositories here. And then finally, if we decide that we are comfortable that the issue can proceed, then the issue will carry on for delivery. I don't know if, yeah, let's call it address the issue, deliver the solution, whatever the case might be. And that could take any number of forms. It could be documentation, it could be development, it could be new functionality or component or whatever the case is. But that would then have been communicated and addressed here at the TSC, approved by the voting members of the TSC, and then we would go into some sort of execution phase. Any questions or anything that anybody thought they would want to see on this? In a process such as this, anything that's missing or anything that's alarming? Thank you, Foley. We do have a quorum today. Could I have a show of hands from our voting members of the TSC if we can adopt this process going forward? I'm going to put my voting hand on the screen. Thank you. We've got voting thumbs up from Greg and Johan, so we can record that as a TSC decision. Thank you very much. That was an easy one. Let's hope everything else goes as easy. Next on our agenda, so from a TSC expansion perspective, this might also be an opportunity to welcome our latest participant on the TSC, which is Kyle Caldwell. Kyle, I can see you there, just joined our call. Kyle is from the Clearinghouse in the US and is attending the TSC as an observer and participant to share his industry knowledge and experience. Kyle, I don't know if you are comfortable maybe just quickly going on camera and introducing yourself to our audience today.
Yeah, it looks like my camera's not working. But great to meet you guys here at the Clearinghouse. I'm the VP Head of Fraud Prevention. I've worked in or across the financial industry and fraud, holding a variety of different positions from analyst to SVP of fraud product. Here at the Clearinghouse now focused around protecting our various networks and services, specifically on RTP right now, but overall strategy of the Clearinghouse. So happy to be involved, happy to help where I can, and I appreciate the inclusion.
Thank you very much and welcome aboard, Kyle. Our community will certainly make you feel welcome, I hope. And we are very excited and looking forward to your contribution and your wealth of experience as you help us make our way forward. Thank you very much. Right. And then in addition to people such as Kyle, who are joining in sort of either as a personal capacity or as a representative of a variety of organizations, we are also intending to expand the audience for our technical steering committee to include implementers and operators of Tazama, both current and prospective. There are a number of organizations who have already deployed Tazama, either for themselves or for others. And this is a great opportunity for us to expand the technical steering committee to wrap those other participants into our organization and our fold. The TSC at the moment is the focal point for our community. So this is where most of our community conversations happen, and we would like to get as many people involved in that in the future as possible. And we are going to be sending out invitations to a variety of organizations. If there is somebody that anybody here is aware of that should also be participating, please do let us know. And we can certainly also reach out to them and add them to our invitation for this particular meeting. The next meeting up on our agenda or in our schedule is on the 19th of March. So we would want to have all of those invitations sent out and then hopefully have a large number of fresh faces in this meeting on the 19th of March, which then brings us to the next thing. So from a timing perspective, what we want to be able to do at the moment is we are anticipating the delivery of a very large tranche of functionality for Tazama, both as internal components, enhancing our existing engine, but more importantly, the expansion of our ecosystem to include functionality such as case and investigation management, business intelligence, analytics, and reporting, new tooling and software development kits for the interface building called the Tazama Connection Studio, and then also for rule building called the Tazama Rule Studio. We are going to be conducting an internal alpha testing to commit mid-March. So that would be done by the product team to make sure that we are able to stand Tazama up in its full plumage, and then also get that system ready for participation by our community. The intention here is to then kick off a public beta testing program in April, where we can have our community get their hands on Tazama and then explore the system with all of its functionality. We want to be able to do this in two ways. So it would be launched under the auspices of the Technical Steering Committee as a technical review and participation in the product from a testing perspective, and then supported by the product team itself as we also continue to do our own testing. But we are looking specifically for participants who would be willing to do a self-deployment of the system in their own environments, so that we can also test the deployment processes of the system and make sure that we can also explain that to other people. And then in addition to that, we want to be able to give people a low barrier to entry access sandbox of Tazama in a multi-tenanted fashion, so that people who do not necessarily have the current capability or the appetite to deploy Tazama for testing purposes can at least experience the functionality of Tazama in a multi-tenanted or managed service kind of context. So we want to be able to host a sandbox for Tazama. We do currently have an AWS environment where we could potentially deploy this functionality. We are currently running our demo environment out of that sandbox, but we are going to need some help on the deployment into the AWS sandbox for community participation. So if there's anybody there who can help us with that deployment, please reach out to us and let us know. Before we go into the next segment of our program today, I just want to pause here for questions. Any questions from anyone?
Nothing. Good afternoon and morning to those that are in the morning circuit. Just to say, I've pasted on the chat my email address for any participants that you would want to be part of the TSC going forward. the details can be shared on that email in case the messages on this chat disappear. Thanks, Justice.
Thank you very much, Colin. I appreciate it. Folly. You're not on mute, but I can't hear anything, Foley.
Oh, hello. Oh, can you hear
Yes,
me
hi.
now?
Yes, yes, I
Sorry
can
about
hear you
that.
now.
I'm saying, first of all, this is amazing. I think that's going to be great if we can get a Tazama instance up that anyone can try. So that's very cool. But what functionality are we aiming of Tazama to deploy there? Are we aiming to have everything Tazama up and running there, including all the case management stuff and everything else?
Yes, it's going to be the entire system with all of the extended ecosystem components. So including the entire analytics stack, Apache Hudi, NiFi, all of the databases around that, the Tazama core engine, flowable engine with the Tazama case and investigation management system built on top of that, and then also the Tazama Connection Studio and the Tazama Rule Studio. So basically, we are going to try and test all of Tazama end to end in a sort of a sandbox environment, if possible.
Wow,
Very
that's amazing.
ambitious.
Yes, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Looking forward to
yeah.
that.
So am I. So we'll see how that goes. So we're going to be doing that internally, Sandy and I, from about mid-March to the end of March. So giving ourselves 2 weeks to get everything up and running and run an effective smoke test on the system, and then going public with a sandbox in April. So please keep your fingers crossed and hold your thumbs for us as we go into this critical phase of our project. Okay, I'm going to go through very quickly 3 issues that we have raised. These are on our GitHub as well. So as I mentioned, we have published the issues, but fairly late notice, so they only came out today. And I know a few of you only woke up about an hour ago anyway, because you're in the US, so nobody has had an opportunity to really look at these in detail. So we are going to bank this information for you to also review after the session. But for today, I do want us to at least be aware of these issues and to introduce you to these specific problems that we are currently facing and that we would like to have solutions for, and also be able to take advice from our members in the TSC today on any proposals that they might have for solving some of these. So first up here, and these are ranked in almost priority of urgency for us. And the reason why this one is ranked first is the problem that we are facing at the moment is our rule processors are effectively hard-coded and attached to a specific transaction type. So the transaction type itself is defined in the rule processor's interface. So we advocate and deploy all of our code in a type-safe manner. Let me put this over here so I can just show you what that looks like. So there is an interface that we are using, and that interface is currently bound to a PAX002 message type. What this means is that if we are communicating a message to our rule processors, that message has to be in a PAX002 format. What we need, and especially also because we are going to be using the Tazama Connection Studio to create an infinite variety of new message types and data flows inside the system, and then create a large number of new rule processors to evaluate those new message types, this constraint that we have implemented in the system is no longer going to be working for us. What we now need to do is to find a way that we can have the messages sent inside the system to be of any type. And we can't give people a fixed list of message types that they are allowed to use. We want people to be able to use the system to create interfaces for any message type and then be able to create rules to evaluate any message type. So the solution that we are looking for here is, how do we do this in a way that still maintains all of the things that we like about TypeScript? Type safety, stable contracts, runtime validation, flexibility of new message types without having to redeploy the core system or without having to recompile anything, because these types are currently embedded in our software libraries. and generated code compatibility. Rule Studio output that we are building must also be compatible with the system. We are deploying rule processors out of the Rule Studio in exactly the same way that we are currently building a rule processor, which is to embed a rule module inside the rule executor. Our Paces development team, who are currently working on the Rule Studio, are joining us today. I'm going to hand over to the team to maybe just walk us through the work that they have been doing in this space, and then we will see where that leaves us today. I'm going to hand over to the team. Fatima, who's going to be doing the presentation today?
Hi, Justice. This is Arif from.
Arif, you're there. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, take it away.
Okay. Thank you. So, hi everyone. I am Arif from Paces team, and I have Adil, Ahmed, and Fatma with me in this call, and we will walk you through that right now what problem we are working on and how it is going to be solved with the help of the members in this team. So basically, while we were working on the Tazama Rule Studio, so we were able to create different kind of rules. And basically, we were focused on creating the rules. So we took pack 002 as an base transaction for us, and we created we start creating different rules. But when we tried different transaction types, when we start creating those transaction types from Tazama Connection Studio and ingesting them into via DAMs. So at the point of Tazama Rule Studio, we kind of hit the block. So let me quickly share my screen to walk you through that what's inside the code, and maybe it would give us an idea that maybe what part of the code that needs to be changed or what modules that might get affected. So let me quickly share my screen. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Right. So basically, Justice has already gave you the overall context that what existing transactions that are there. So PAX2 is the only one that is being evaluated, and we see the result into the evaluation table where we can see that what rules are executed and what are the typology results. But when we tried it on different type of transaction, we created a new kind of transaction, so that's where we could not get the results. So here we can see that this is the interface for PAC002 inside the FRMS UA lib, and this is the data cache that are type safety. For type safety purpose, these are being created as an interface. If I open this screen, so this is the interface where we are using is a very specific kind of like PAC002 interface, and here we are using the data cache. Since we have added the data model extension into Tazama Connection Studio as well, so now we will be able to add more properties into data cache, so that every implementer can use or can create their own data cache and have specific fields. So that's where if we go to the rule executor, so we will see that whenever we are getting the transactions, so we are using like rule request, which is of type PAC002 in this interface. And this is where our new transactions that are being created via Tazama Connection Studios getting dropped off. So this is the part that is affected. And if we go into the rule file itself, because we are getting new rules, so this is rule 021. So here we can see that inside the rule request, we are using the same interface, which is of like type PAC002. This is the thing, if I come here, so rule executor has the same rule request object. Here we have like inside a single rule we have the same rule request. So this is the problem that we are facing, and I think that's where we need a solution. So we start looking different modules to see if that how event director is like ingesting the data from DAMs and TMS, and how it's forwarding it further. So this is the interface that we notice, which has a type unknown. So I think if someone has worked on it, so maybe they can like give us an idea that whether we should be using this kind of approach instead of like using the PAG002 interface. So this is not just for the like PAG002 transaction only, but it also applies to data cache as well. So these are two different objects that we need to like focus on.
Arif, could you maybe also just explain what the issue is with the data cache? I think
Yes.
I understand what you mean, but maybe just for the
Yeah, sure.
total audience.
Yes, sure. So for the data cache, like here we can see that we have the debtor ID, creditor ID, and like these are some of the fields that are like we can say that are hard coded for the data cache. Like we are creating the data cache on the fly, so that for example in PAX2 we need some information that instead of going to database, we just fetch it from the previous PAX8 transaction. So and like these are like 14, 15 properties that we are seeing here. But maybe if there is a different bank with different requirement or with different like fields they need to add it. So in the Tazama Connection Studio, we have provided the data model extension screen where we are able to like we are letting user create new properties or new type of objects here, so that they can ingest the data easily via the Tazama Connection Studio, and DAMs would process those data and create the data cache on the fly. Like this one. So here, like we don't no longer need this specific interface. Instead, we just need an interface that is expandable and that can like ingest any kind of new properties into it into a JSON format. So
So
we
effectively
yes.
changes to the interface without having to build a new FRMS COE lib, which is where these interfaces are housed, and then without having to then rebuild all of the components that currently implement the FRMS COE lib, because that's the only way to propagate the change. So we want to be able to do this without actual code changes, and to do this through configuration. That's what we're asking for. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Or
right.
dynamically.
Or dynamically, yes. But in order to like handle those dynamic messages, we need to have the code available that can also like handle those dynamic messages instead of these interfaces, which has very specific kind of data available. Like for example, if I show you PAG002, so PAG002 interface has this kind of data. So now we are expecting that a user can create any kind of new message. So these interfaces would be limiting us and would not let us create a new kind of data. Right. So here, like we are looking for the solution as well. We are also like running some POCs at our end as well, and we are also seeing that what existing implementation that has been done, and maybe we can take inspiration from there and use it. For example, in Event Director, we see that the transaction type is being handled like this one. If I show you the event director, so here it says that the represent transition with unknown structure. So maybe this problem, because I saw that in the event director now like there was some open issue as well. Uh, I'll show you, which says that it only handles the PAG002 message. So maybe if it has been resolved, or that's why we are seeing this part. So I'm not exactly sure, but I saw the issue here, and maybe it's related to the line that is written here.
In terms of the event director, the entire message isn't serialized when it is processed by the event director. It's why the transaction type sits outside of the protobuf object. So all the event director really needs is the transaction type. So it can then decide which range of typologies and rules are being propagated. I do not remember that particular issue, and I can't remember if we had actually fixed it. It's probably part of the cleanup that we need to do to make sure. But at the moment, as far as I know, the event director doesn't really need to know what type of transaction it is. In its context, it just needs to know what the value of the TXTP field is. So that's probably not going to help us here.
All right, right.
So
Yeah,
sorry, just
yes,
some more context there. So the reason why we kept it this way, if I remember correctly, was so that we don't have to deserialize the transaction object in the event
Yes.
director. So it
Yeah,
just
for
needs the transaction
performance.
type. So it doesn't need to do the protobuf serialization. It will just
Yeah.
pass whatever else is in that object on without doing anything with it. So that's the reason why it was done that way. So Arif, if
Yes.
I can understand correctly, are you asking, can you use the same pattern?
yes,
Or
that's right.
well, in theory, you could, but in the issue 430, the general issue that Justice had created, um, if you go this route, then you lose your type safety and your stable contracts and your runtime validation and so forth.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
this is a quick and dirty way to get there, but you will lose things like type safety and validation unless you unless you still do the validation on every single rule side, but the rest of the platform will just pass that object along. But
All right. So, Johan, do you think that this can work for us? Record string
it's
unknown.
basically the same. It's basically
Yeah.
the exact same as the other one.
Yeah, because right now what we are seeing is because now the nature of these components are changing, because we would be expecting any kind of transaction that is being created via uh, via Tazama Connection Studio. That's why I think type safety is if we need to ensure that these are like following the type safety pattern. So still, I think that we might for type safety, I think we need interfaces, or otherwise, I think we might need to have some kind of uh, more flexible objects like these ones. Or do you think that there can be any other approach that can be used?
Well, I guess that question was directed to me. So based on the again on the issue 430, Justice had suggested implementation of like JSON schemas, and then your JSON schema allows for runtime validation and things like that. So I'm not sure if you, Justice, have you gone through that issue, or is this a preface to going through the six possible
So-
solutions that you've got?
In the interest of full disclosure, I didn't write that issue. But I used Claude as a crutch, so you can tell by all of the emojis in the text. But the issue itself, from my perspective, Claude tried to solve the problem that we had without breaking the benefits that we were getting from type safety. And ultimately, type safety is one of the reasons why we picked TypeScript as our core language and not JavaScript. Because obviously JavaScript doesn't have type safety and you can literally do whatever you want. But then it impacts the robustness of your solution at the end of the day. So if you don't rely on type safety for a lot of validation, your runtime validation has to be provided for in some other way. And then you would have to say, okay, every rule processor is now responsible for making sure that the payload that it received is a valid payload before it starts to process it, because it doesn't want to run into a bend if it finds information is unexpectedly missing from that payload, or that the payload itself has been malformed, or whatever the case might be, right? Type safety will give you that security, but if you remove it, then you will need to provide some other kind of mechanism for it. So when I look at what we have on the screen at the moment, is like, sure, we can reduce that object to a generic payload, right? Where there is no meaning ascribed to the object itself. You'll have to describe the meaning in the use, right? But that for me is like, I don't know if that leaves the system vulnerable in an undesirable way. It does feel like it does. So how do we mitigate that, right? So sure, this could be a quick and dirty solution to get the data flowing, but we are still going to have to be responsible for making sure that the data is valid. So how would we do that? And I think what Claude came up with here, what it calls, let me just see what the naming of this was. Did it even give it a name? Yes, schema-driven type system. So your type of each message is informed through, or is enforced through the application and the validation of the message against the JSON schema. So when you are creating a new message type in your interface, I think, RF, if I remember the Tazama Connection Studio correctly, you can actually develop that message from a JSON schema in the first place. So in theory, you already have a JSON schema that you can then later use to evaluate and validate that message, right? So the schema is already part of the process. So is
Yes,
it
yes.
possible then to implement the validation of the payload against that schema inside the rule processor when it is actually finally being unpacked, so that we can safely append a rule processor if there is an issue? And I suppose that schema validation could also happen at the Tazama Connection Studio, or what we call the DEMS API, the Dynamic Event Monitoring System API or Service API. So if we already validate that schema at that point, we can know that a valid message has been inserted in the system. But even then, I still think the rule processor itself needs to be responsible for making sure that the information that it is looking for in the message is actually in the message.
Right, Justice. So yes, you're on point, Justice, because that's what we are actually doing for in DAMs. Like whenever we are creating a new endpoint in Tazama Connection Studio, so we are generating the schema against the JSON or XML, and whenever we hit DAMs with a payload, so we check the incoming payload against that schema, and if it's a valid like payload with schema being validated, then it runs down the system. Otherwise the transaction goes into the quarantine table. So at the first stage, like DAMS is ensuring that all the required fields that we need are being there, are do exist into that schema. into that payload, and that's where we are ensuring that only valid transactions are passed through event director, event like a rule processor and TATPROC. So this is the part that's ensuring us that we are ingesting the valid payload.
Okay. Doing schema validation at least one point up front in the DEMS API, I think is essential, and that's something that's unavoidable regardless. So if there is a performance impact, it's a impact that we have to accept. Doing schema validation again in a rule processor, we are now perhaps doing the same thing twice, but for two different purposes. Then we might want to ask what the performance impact of schema validation would be if the rule processor has to do it every single time it receives a message, on top of the DEMS having already done it. Because their requirements for validation are going to be subtly different, right?
Right. But I think
So
that if we are, yes, sorry. So if we are already validating the schema on DAM's part, so we are ensuring that only valid messages are being ingested into our system. So rule processor should work in with the valid message that is already being checked by DAMs.
right. So let me give you an example. And I don't know if it's a realistic example, but let's try, right? So when we are validating against the schema, we would validate for completeness, right? And mandatory information. But when a rule processor wants to use information out of a message, it may want to use information that is not necessarily mandatory, but it then needs to be able to handle an exception if that information is missing, right? Which means that the rule processor needs a sort of a separate perspective on what is in the message. So how do we do that error handling on the rule processor side? Do we have to then basically build in guard statements to say, I'm looking for this attribute. If this attribute is not inside the message, then I need to generate an exit condition that says the information that I'm looking for isn't here. That becomes the responsibility of the rule processor then.
Sorry, just a step back. I'm missing the reason why we want to do the validation at the rule processor and not at the TMS API. So right up front.
So the TMS API, if we are using a JSON schema, right? The JSON schema may define a specific field as optional, right? Which means that the schema will accept when that field is missing. But when the rule processor wants to process that specific information and it finds that that field, which is not mandatory, is now not populated, the rule processor needs its own validation step or its own exception handling step, right? So in my head, that just means that the rule processor needs a guard statement to deal with missing non-mandatory information as a matter of course. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the schema validation is necessary, because the schema that the rule processor is going to use is going to be identical to the schema that the DEMS API used, so it's not going to come to a different conclusion. Is that what we're saying? I feel like we're almost on the same page.
I'm not sure if you're asking me, but I guess that it sounds in summary to me what you and Arif are saying. But what I'm wondering is why can we not extend that? We're building a schema, right? So why don't we set the schema up at the TMS API? And if you're submitting a PAXO2, TMS API will know it's a PAXO2 and it will validate the PAXO2. If you're submitting a type of X, then Tazama will know it's a type of X and it will validate according to the X schema.
Yes, so upfront, right at the door.
Yes.
So at the moment we have the TMS API, which is effectively a hard-coded set of endpoints with fixed interfaces and a schema, right? So and those are our current four messages. The Tazama Connection Studio creates custom interfaces on what we call the Dynamic Event Monitoring Service API. So you can then create on the fly new interfaces with their own schemas. And that could be anything, right? So sure, you are correct. If we create those messages and the interfaces from a schema, then we can also use the schema to then validate when those messages are being received, which is also great, right? So sure, we can do that. So at the API level, we can validate incoming messages. That will then, so let's walk this through the flow, right? So I have a message type X, right? I have deployed a new interface for message type X to be received by the DEMS API. Somebody then sends a message to the X endpoint, and it is validated by the DEMS API and then routed to the event monitoring, the event director inside protobuf. The transaction type is exposed outside of the protobuf object, so the event director can then route that message to where it needs to go. It doesn't need to inspect the structure of the message. It doesn't care. Then the message arrives at the rule processor, and the rule processor says, I am expecting message X, right? And I have some reasonable assumptions about what is in message X, because message X is not defined by an interface now. It is defined by a schema that was validated in the DEMS API. The rule processor itself doesn't at that point have access to that schema. So it will have to then serialize the entire object. And then when it starts looking for attributes inside that object, it doesn't have a sort of a guide for it, right? So even when if I had to code this by hand, there's no autocorrect or autocomplete, for example, for what is in that message. I basically have to know what's in that message. So are we saying that that is the only way to do this?
I don't think so, no. So you are able to, in your DEMS Studio, you are able to generate the schemas, right? When you generate the
Yes.
JSON schema, you can also generate the related TypeScript model or class for that same schema. And then your rule processes, the change that's going to need to happen, obviously it's a systematic change, this whole thing that we're talking about, but your rule processes needs to be able to dynamically understand additional types. But there's two things here that I think we shouldn't get confused, and the one is runtime, and the other one is development time. Because in development time is when you
Yes.
need your IntelliSense and so forth. So in my development time, I know I am building a rule for X, right? So I can just go take the TypeScript schema or the JSON schema and generate the TypeScript schema for X. Because in development time, I know this. And then in runtime is when the validation comes in, right? But then the rule processor don't need to do the validation because according to me, the TMS API should do the validation so that if this object is not well formatted or it's not correct, then the calling application should immediately know this transaction is not going to be processed. So that's why for me, it's important to have the validation right up front because that's the only interface we have to the calling application.
Right.
So yes, there's runtime and there's design time or development time, and I think that's two separate problems.
Okay. So from a runtime perspective, are we saying that a unknown or an any object would be, I don't know, the only solution here? Or the preferred solution?
There
Going back to,
is,
is this still a quick and dirty or is it the only way?
I don't want to say yes or no because I'm not actually entirely sure how protobuf will handle different object types that it needs to serialize as this unknown type, because the proto we saw the TypeScript code now, but the
Yeah.
proto files are correlating to these we have not seen, and in there is the important part, where if that I believe the transaction object only allows for the paxer2 currently. So the whole serialization framework needs to know, it needs to be strongly typed. That's the whole point of using protofiles. So that's the piece that that we have not seen yet.
If I remember correctly, the protofiles actually do have the other types because they go as far as the event director. But after the event director, it only handles the pack002. So if I recall, all of those definitions are in there. From a sort of a generic message perspective, I believe inside protobuf, we are putting this inside a generic envelope. So to your point, those messages are not being, they don't benefit from the performance efficiency introduced by protobuf because they are not being, what you call it, compressed in the same way according to their class. It's basically just a blob. But that's the trade-off for flexibility. There was a hand up, Ahmad.
I just wanted to say for the runtime validation protobuf that we're talking about, I've been looking into it for the last few hours. Obviously, we are in a crunch here, so didn't get a chance to work on this thoroughly. But there might be a way possible, but it requires a lot of rework of the existing system, rule executor or event director or something, which will once again like kind of mean that we need to go back to the drawing board. We need to redesign a large part of the system. I don't know if that is like an acceptable trade-off for strongly typing the transactions, the messages.
Thanks, Ahmad. I also don't know. I guess that's why we're here, to benefit from our collective experience. We are almost at time. I don't think we are going to be able to solve this problem, but I also don't want to leave this for the next 2 weeks. So can I propose perhaps that we create almost a small working group around this, to be able to work this through in the next week or so, bearing in mind that we are traveling next week. So we are going to be in Kigali for the Mojaloop convening, but that's not the whole week. So can I maybe propose that the PACES team takes the feedback from this meeting, and maybe do a little bit of internal brainstorming, call me for any support that you might need, and then we set up a review with anyone who is who'd like to participate from this forum for maybe let's say Tuesday or early Wednesday. Will that work?
Yes, sure. This is, I think that would be very helpful because we will also get some time to run our POCs and also look at the system in detail to exactly share with you that what are the impacted areas, because we could not see everything in detail for this meeting. But yes, that in the next week, we are sure that we will come up with more concrete solution or more concrete details.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then also, if I could ask if somebody could have a look at what Claude suggested and see if that makes sense for this particular context. Just a assessment of whether or not we think there's any value in that would be great as well. And then we'll set up time. And what I'd like to do is to maybe just when we do have that conversation is to record that so that it can be appended to this conversation as it happens, because this gets published on YouTube as a TSC event. I'd like to be able to just conclude whatever conversation we are having and also put this in the same place if anybody is following along and wants to see how we got to where we ended up. So we'll
Happy
record that as well.
to, yes, happy to review if you guys have feedback, you can add it to a story or add it to comments of Justice a sticker or whatever. Happy to review
Yes.
those. And then if the session, if I'm able to attend this session on Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll definitely try to be there.
Thank you. Appreciate it. What we will do is we have a regular Tuesday afternoon session for technical issues, usually for the product team, along with Greg. I'll repurpose that meeting if everybody can make that time work. Otherwise, we'll find a different time. So that is between 3 and 5 p.m. on Tuesday, South African Standard Time. So we'll work around that. If that can't work for everyone, we'll find a different time. But let's see where we get where we end up.
Sounds good.
Alrighty. I'm not going to start any of the other two issues that we do have on our list. We'll backlog those. Those are not quite as urgent as these, but then we will get to those at a future TSC as well. Any other comments, feedback, questions, concerns, alarms from anybody for today before we sign off? Wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and your contribution. It is appreciated as always, and we'll keep everybody posted on the outcome of this discussion as well. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day and your evening.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Yes.
Thank you. Good luck.